The city buzzes with life. Expensive cars line the streets. Tall glass buildings reflect the morning sun. Pedestrians in designer suits and dresses move with purpose. It's a high-end district, the kind of place where wealth is expected. A black man walks down the sidewalk, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. His polished shoes tap against the pavement with each step. He checks his watch, an elegant timepiece that speaks of success. His posture is upright, confident. He's heading to an important business meeting, unaware that someone is already watching him. Across the street, a police officer sits in his patrol car. He's in his mid-40s, a seasoned officer with a hardened look. His uniform is crisp, badge gleaming under the sunlight, but behind his sunglasses, his gaze is sharp, judgmental. He sees the black man, studies him. Something about him doesn't sit right. He doesn't fit the image the officer expects in this neighborhood. The officer's mind races with assumptions. Maybe he's not supposed to be here. Maybe he's up to something. Maybe he's another criminal trying to blend in. The thought lingers, growing into suspicion. The CEO walks past a luxury storefront. The officer's grip tightens on the wheel. He's convinced something is wrong. He can't explain it, but he trusts his instincts. Flashing lights, a quick decision. The officer steps out of his car, adjusting his belt. His radio crackles softly, but he doesn't hear it. His focus is locked on the black man, who is just going about his day. With a firm hand on his holster, the officer makes his move. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" The CEO pauses, confused. The day is about to take an unexpected turn. The CEO turns his head, surprised by the sharp command. He stops walking, adjusting the briefcase in his hand. The officer strides toward him, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. His posture is rigid, his expression serious. "You got business around here?" the cop asks, his tone firm, almost accusatory. The CEO blinks, confused. "Excuse me?" "I said, what are you doing here?" The officer repeats, stepping closer. His hand hovers near his holster, fingers twitching. The CEO exhales slowly. His voice remains calm. "I'm on my way to a meeting." The officer scoffs, looking him up and down as if searching for a flaw, something out of place. "A meeting, huh? Where?" The CEO tilts his head slightly, now more annoyed than confused. "Why do you need to know?" The cop's eyes narrow. He doesn't like being questioned. "Show me some ID." His voice is sharper this time. Not a request, a demand. A few people walking by slow their pace, turning their heads. Their curiosity grows as they sense tension in the air. A man in a business suit being stopped in broad daylight. It doesn't sit right. The CEO sighs, reaching into his pocket. "Fine." He pulls out his wallet and hands over his driver's license. The officer snatches it, barely glancing at the name before looking back at him. "Whose ID is this?" he asks. The CEO stares at him. "Mine." The cop's lips press into a thin line. "You sure about that?" The CEO raises an eyebrow, holding back his irritation. "You just asked for my ID. Now you're saying it's not mine?" More bystanders stop to watch. A woman pulls out her phone, pressing record. The atmosphere shifts. The CEO, still calm, meets the officer's gaze. "Is there a reason you stopped me?" The cop doesn't answer immediately. He looks at the ID again, then back at the CEO, still unconvinced. "Just doing my job," he mutters. The CEO folds his arms. "And what exactly is my crime?" The cop doesn't like the question. His jaw tightens. He won't back down now. He has to prove his authority. The crowd around them grows. The tension thickens. The moment is far from over. The officer stares at the ID again, his eyes scanning the name, the picture, the address. But something in his mind refuses to accept it. It doesn't fit the story he's already built in his head. "This doesn't look right," the cop mutters. His grip tightens around the card. The CEO tilts his head, his patience wearing thin. "What do you mean it doesn't look right?" The officer exhales sharply, shifting his stance. Could be fake. Could be stolen. His tone is dismissive, almost careless. The CEO takes a slow breath, keeping his composure. It's neither. That's my ID. The cop smirks slightly, like he's figured something out. He gestures toward the row of expensive shops behind them. You've been standing around here a while. You casing these businesses? The CEO's expression changes, his brows furrow, his lips press together. Casing businesses? His voice carries a mix of disbelief and frustration. You heard me, the officer says, crossing his arms. I've seen it before. Guys like you walk around, pretending to belong. Next thing you know, windows are smashed, cash registers are emptied. The CEO exhales through his nose, shaking his head slightly. I told you, I have a meeting. I work in this area. The cop waves a hand dismissively. Uh-huh. Doing what exactly? The CEO meets his gaze, unblinking. Running my company. The officer lets out a short, humorless chuckle. Oh, so you run a company now, right? His tone drips with sarcasm. He doesn't believe a word of it. Around them, murmurs grow. People in suits and casual clothes stand at a distance, whispering to one another. Some shake their heads. Others pull out their phones, pressing record. They've seen scenes like this before. The CEO straightens his posture. Officer, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I'm not committing a crime. I'm not trespassing. I'm not casing businesses. I'm walking to a meeting. But the officer doesn't want to hear it. He sees only what he wants to see. You don't belong here, he says, his voice lower now, almost a warning. I can feel it. The CEO's jaw clenches. You can feel it? The cop nods. Yeah, my gut tells me something's off. The CEO shakes his head, disbelief washing over him. Your gut? The crowd shifts. The air feels heavier. The officer stands firm, unwilling to back down. The CEO realizes this won't end easily, and the cameras keep recording. The CEO takes a deep breath, steadying himself. His patience is gone, but his composure remains. He refuses to be intimidated. Officer, he says, his voice firm, you've accused me of something without proof. You've questioned my ID, my presence, and now my career. So, tell me, am I being detained? The cop stiffens, his jaw tightening. He wasn't expecting pushback. I'm conducting an investigation, he replies quickly. An investigation into what? The CEO folds his arms, staring the officer down. Walking while black? Wearing a suit in the wrong neighborhood? A few bystanders murmur in agreement. The officer shifts his weight, clearly uncomfortable, but he refuses to back off. Watch yourself, he warns, pointing a finger. I can take you in for obstructing an investigation. The CEO doesn't flinch. Obstructing what exactly? I've answered every question. I've shown you my ID. I've explained why I'm here. You're the only one escalating this situation. The officer's face flushes slightly. He's used to people complying, not questioning him, not challenging him like this, especially in public. A voice from the crowd speaks up. Let him go, man. You're harassing him. Another joins in. Yeah, he's not doing anything wrong. The officer glances around, realizing more people are watching than before. Some have their phones raised. A woman near the front shakes her head. This is racial profiling, and we all know it. The CEO steps forward slightly, but his tone remains controlled. I know my rights, officer. If I'm not under arrest, I'm free to go. The officer's fingers twitch near his belt. His pride is on the line now. He doesn't like losing control. You're acting suspicious, he snaps. That's enough reason to keep you here. The CEO narrows his eyes. Suspicious how? By existing? By walking to a meeting? The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. Someone else calls out. You're embarrassing yourself, man. The officer glares at the bystanders, frustration flickering in his eyes. But deep down, he knows he's in a losing battle. The weight of the cameras, the whispers, the undeniable truth, it's all pressing down on him. The CEO tilts his head, waiting. "Are we done here?" The officer hesitates. His pride screams at him to push harder, but the moment is slipping from his control. His authority, once unquestioned, now hangs by a thread, and the crowd keeps watching. The officer clenches his jaw. His authority is slipping, and he knows it. The crowd is watching, recording, questioning his every move. He refuses to lose face. His hand moves to his radio. Unit 12 requesting backup, possible suspect refusing to cooperate. He says, his voice steady but edged with frustration. The CEO exhales, shaking his head. "Refusing to cooperate? I've answered every question." The officer ignores him. The seconds drag on. The crowd murmurs. The tension lingers. Then, the sound of approaching sirens fills the air. A second patrol car pulls up. 2 officers step out. 1 male, 1 female. They assess the scene, noting the onlookers, the phones, the energy in the air. But then, their eyes land on the CEO. Recognition flashes across their faces. The male officer's posture shifts from rigid to alert. The female officer exchanges a quick glance with him. The first cop straightens, assuming he's won. "Glad you're here," he says, gesturing toward the CEO. "Guy's been acting suspicious, won't cooperate." The new officer ignores him. Instead, he steps forward, his tone immediately different. "Mr. Carter?" he asks, eyebrows raised. The CEO nods. "That's me." The first cop blinks. "Mr. Carter?" He looks between them, confused. The second officer speaks now, her tone professional, yet almost cautious. "Sir, is everything all right?" The crowd shifts, sensing the change. The dynamic is different now. The first cop scowls. "Wait, you know him?" The male officer shoots him a look. "Of course we do." He turns back to the CEO. "Apologies, sir. Is there an issue here?" The CEO glances at the first officer, then back at the others. "I was just walking to a meeting. This officer thought otherwise." The first cop stiffens. His confidence wavers. He looks at his colleagues, waiting for them to back him up. Instead, they look at him. Their expressions unreadable, but their silence says enough. The realization starts to sink in. He miscalculated, and now he's the one being watched. The first cop shifts uncomfortably as the other officers exchange glances. Something is off. He expected backup to support him, but instead, they seem hesitant. The male officer clears his throat. "Officer Reynolds," he says, addressing the first cop directly. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" Reynolds frowns. "What do you mean?" His voice is still firm, but there's a flicker of doubt now. The female officer steps forward. "That's Jonathan Carter, CEO of Carter Industries." Reynolds blinks. The name rings a bell, but he struggles to place it. He glances at the CEO, still standing tall, watching him. "Carter Industries?" Reynolds repeats, trying to mask his confusion. The male officer sighs. "One of the biggest tech firms in the country, hundreds of employees, billion-dollar contracts. He's been featured in Forbes. He donates millions to local businesses. And..." He pauses, looking directly at Reynolds. "He's one of the biggest financial supporters of police training programs in this city." A beat of silence. The words hit Reynolds like a brick. His posture stiffens, his face paling slightly. The crowd stirs, catching onto the shift in power. Someone in the back mutters, "Oh, this is going to be good." Reynolds looks at Carter again, but now he sees him differently. Not as a suspect, not as a criminal, but as someone far above his rank, someone with real influence. Carter folds his arms, tilting his head slightly. "You assumed I was a threat," he says calmly. "You thought I didn't belong, But the truth is, officer, I probably pay more taxes than your entire department's budget. A ripple of amusement spreads through the crowd. A few people chuckle. The woman recording smirks. Reynolds' throat goes dry. His arrogance is slipping, replaced by something he rarely feels: panic. The female officer turns back to Carter. Sir, we sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Carter nods but doesn't break eye contact with Reynolds. A misunderstanding, he repeats. Interesting choice of words. Reynolds swallows hard. His hands clench at his sides. The power dynamic has shifted completely. The crowd is no longer watching Carter for answers. They're watching Reynolds for his reaction. And he has none. He's trapped in a moment of realization, one that he will never live down. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. More phones are out now, recording everything. People are texting, posting, sharing. The video is already spreading. On social media, captions flood in. Racist cop harasses black CEO. Police caught profiling again. Jonathan Carter targeted for walking while black. Reynolds notices the change. He hears the murmurs. He sees the smirks, the glares, the disapproving looks. His breathing becomes shallow. He's losing control of the situation. Fast. Carter remains calm, his composure unshaken. He adjusts his suit jacket, glancing down at his watch. I have a meeting to get to, he says, voice steady. But before I go, I want to say something. The crowd quiets, even the officers listen. Carter turns back to Reynolds. This is why people don't trust the police, he says evenly. Because officers like you see a black man in a nice neighborhood and assume the worst. Reynolds opens his mouth, but no words come out. Carter continues. You didn't see a businessman. You didn't see a homeowner. You saw a threat. And you were so convinced you were right, you refused to listen. You escalated instead of thinking. Reynolds clenches his jaw. I was just doing my job. Carter raises an eyebrow. Was your job to assume I was a criminal? To ignore my ID? To accuse me of things you had no proof of? He shakes his head. That's not policing. That's profiling. The tension in the air is suffocating. Then, another car pulls up. This time, it's an unmarked vehicle. A senior officer steps out. His uniform is crisp, his badge gleaming under the city lights. He surveys the scene, his sharp eyes taking in the crowd, the phones, the stiff posture of Reynolds. He doesn't need to ask what happened. He already knows. Officer Reynolds, he says, his voice low but firm. Step aside. Reynolds stiffens. Sir, I was just... The senior officer cuts him off with a glare. Step aside. Reynolds hesitates, then moves. He looks down, his confidence shattered. The senior officer turns to Carter. Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for this incident. We will be handling this internally. Carter nods but doesn't smile. I hope so. The department knows the truth. This is a PR nightmare. The video is already viral. The backlash is inevitable. And Officer Reynolds? He just became the face of everything wrong with the system. The fallout is immediate. The video, now viral, spreads like wildfire across social media. News outlets pick it up within hours. Headlines dominate the internet. Racist cop stops black CEO, gets reality check. Another case of racial profiling caught on camera. Police department under fire after unjustified stop. The department scrambles for damage control. Statements are released, calling the incident unfortunate and promising a thorough review. But the public isn't buying it. Officer Reynolds is placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Rumors swirl. Some say he'll be suspended, others think he'll be fired. Either way, his career will never be the same. Jonathan Carter doesn't stay silent. In a press conference the next day, he stands before cameras, his voice calm but firm. This isn't just about me, he says. This is about the thousands of people who face this every day. People without cameras, without witnesses, without influence. He pauses, looking directly at the reporters. What happened to me was profiling, plain and simple. If I were dressed differently, if I weren't in this neighborhood, if I didn't have the resources I do, this could have ended much worse. His words resonate. Social media explodes with support. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people weigh in. We need real accountability. This happens too often, and it needs to stop. Imagine how many times this happens when no one is recording. Meanwhile, Reynolds avoids the public eye. His face is plastered all over the internet. Memes circulate, mocking his arrogance, his downfall. Officer Reynolds thought he had power, found out he had Wi-Fi. When you profile the wrong one. Even fellow officers distance themselves. Some defend him, claiming he was just doing his job. Others say he made a grave mistake and should be held accountable. At home, Reynolds sits in silence, scrolling through the endless backlash. His confidence, once unshakable, is gone. The world now sees him for what he is, and the consequences are just beginning. Carter, despite the attention, moves on. He continues running his company, attending meetings, leading initiatives, but the moment lingers. A week later, he walks into another high-end district. A different cop watches him from a distance. Their eyes meet. This time, the officer looks away. Change doesn't happen overnight, but sometimes it starts with a reality check.